Can I get you something?
Your mofo butter laying me to the bone, jacking me up. Tight me.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Cuddy say can't hang.
Oh, stewardess, I speak jive.
Oh, good.
He said that he's in great pain and he wants to know if you can help him.
All right, would you tell him to just relax and I'll be back as soon as I can with some medicine.
Just hang loose, blood. She's gonna catch up on the rebound on the med side.
What it is, Big Mama? My mama raised no dummies. I duck a rap.
Cut me some slack, Jack.
Say cutting we say be doing everything.
Chump don't want to help, Chump don't get the help.
Say can't hang, say 7 Up.
Jive ass dude don't got no brains anyhow.
Some linguists theorize that the black dialect stemmed from a common West African pidgin that slaves developed during the times that they were warehoused in African ports and crammed into the holds of ships on their way to the United States.
One of the important things is obviously employability. And again, research can show us that those who are employed are those who manage to be able to manage to communicate effectively, to read effectively, and to write effectively, and to talk effectively. And effectively is almost always defined as the standard form of the language.
The only thing I'm demanding as a parent is that my children get an equal education. And I don't feel now that they're getting an equal education, and I feel that the programs that they have for the children are not really the programs that they need to improve and to progress in school.
The dialect of black Americans has historically been stereotyped as an inferior form of speech, and many teachers view these non-standard speakers as intellectually deficient. This attitude is jeopardizing the social and economic upward mobility of many black youths. However, a recent court case has focused on this issue and hopefully will bring about a solution to the problem facing the Green Road children of America. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, the Green Brick Road. Language is often perceived as the most vivid and crucial key to a person's or a group's identity. Since language is culture, how we understand and perceive one another is based on similarities or dissimilarities in our histories, heritages, or cultures. All languages are made up of a number of different dialects. There are between 6 to 9 dialects spoken in the United States. Each dialect has its own historical development, linguistic structure, and its own particular function. We all speak with some form of dialect. What joins all languages together is the necessity to articulate a people's circumstance through the use of verbal symbols. However, language can also be used as a political tool and symbol of power. It is a reality that the group in power determines the acceptable standards of speech for that society. Thus, language can include or exclude you from the larger societal identity. The complexities of the ruling dialect, called Standard American English, can be one of the most imposing obstacles facing many Afro-Americans today. The dialect, indigenous to many black Americans, particularly from the lower socioeconomic scale, has historically been stereotyped as an inferior form of speech, and speakers of black vernacular are often viewed as slow learners or mentally retarded. This attitude is naturally carried over into the classroom, where many teachers equate this non-standard form of English with low intelligence. Because of a child's psychological identification with his language and the sociological reinforcement provided by his culture group, to totally reject his language as inferior is to reject himself. Thus, by the time the ghetto child reaches the 3rd grade, they have instead rejected school.
Well, dialects are very important to people. They establish your membership in the group you belong to. It's kind of interesting that life is paradoxical in terms of language. You have to be like each other enough to be understood, but different enough from each other in order to say who you are. Like, I am blue-collar Midwestern, or I am black, or I am an Appalachian, or I am Texan, or I am Bostonian. You want to be a member of that group, and you don't want to leave it.
We must all learn that every dialect is as good as any other. They are all effective ways of communicating for that particular cultural group. It would be ideal if educators at all levels knew the historical background of black dialect and its overall structural relationship to standard English. Employers should, too, realize that the use of black dialect is in no way an indication of low mental ability. The fact remains, however, that both educational and vocational success demands that blacks conform to the linguistical standards of our society. The failure to speak and write English is an insurmountable roadblock in the quest for a good job. A way must be found to bridge the gap between the dialect of many Afro-Americans and standard English without denigrating their linguistic heritage, so that they can function in both cultural settings. This, of course, must first start in the schools. The problems of school systems not properly addressing themselves to the linguistical and cultural differences in education have been addressed by the now celebrated case involving children from the Green Road Housing Project. In July 1977, 4 black families from Green Road, a scattered site housing project in Ann Arbor, Michigan, filed a suit because their children, who attended the predominantly white middle-class Martin Luther King Elementary School, were not learning. Some black children were placed in special education classes. Some were considered to be mentally retarded, emotionally impaired, or suffering from speech problems. None of the 100 children from the project who attended the school finished. It was charged that the school system violated their civil rights by failing to take appropriate action to help them overcome the language barrier.
I decided to sue because my oldest son, Michael, which has been in King School from kindergarten up until now, he's in the 6th grade. He's been labeled ever since he was 8 years old. And when he went into 6th grade, he had to be retested in order for them to fit a program for him. And he had been labeled as a learning disabled, but they wanted to change it from learning to emotional impaired. And so I disagreed with what they felt, and that was one reason why I decided to sue, because I felt that he was not emotional, and if he had been getting help for 3 years, and if he hadn't improved in 3 years, I didn't see what difference another program would make.
The issue is a very simple issue. We have 15 school kids at an Ann Arbor school, ironically called Martin Luther King Junior Elementary School. And these 15 kids cannot read. And what's happening is the school is taking certain measures which we feel are discriminatory, in that they prevent these kids from actually obtaining the necessary skills that they need in order to be well equipped in the English language. First of all, what they do is they tend to track the kids, and they do it in three ways. One is to put them in special education programs. Second way is to put them in grades below that which they should be in. And the third way is simply not to do anything at all. And it's our feeling that these kids are deserving of more than that. They deserve special reading programs which will address their particular needs.
What are the plaintiffs in the suit demanding? What do they want to happen out of the case?
Well, essentially, they're asking for reading programs, as I indicated to you earlier. That's the crux of the lawsuit. As you all know, living in this American society, if you don't have the basic skills, language skills, you find that, for the most part, you are left out in the cold. You can't get a job, you can't go on to higher educational opportunities. So essentially what the parents here want is a reading program for their kids. In addition to that, they want the kids not to be labeled. Having a special education handle has the effect of stigmatizing a student throughout his entire academic career. It's not often that you find a person who has a learning disability or an emotionally impaired disability functioning as a doctor or as a lawyer. And as a result, many of these kids are considered dummies throughout their entire academic careers.
Under careful scrutiny, the press, in a responsible attempt to cover the issue fact by fact and voice the public's concern, filed misleading reports. Perhaps the most misleading point was that the suit was an attempt to have, quote, black English taught in the schools. That was obviously not the mandate of U.S. District Judge Charles Joyner, nor the intention of the parents who brought the class action suit.
The only thing I'm demanding as a parent is that my children get an equal education. And I don't feel now that they're getting an equal education, and I feel that the programs that they have for the children are not really the programs that they need to improve and to progress in school, to be caught up with the rest of the classroom. So the only thing I'm demanding is that they get an equal education, which I don't think they are.
Dr. Roger Shy was called in by Judge Charles Joyner to advise the Ann Arbor School Board. He is the founder of the sociolinguistics program at Georgetown University and associate director for the Center for the Applied Linguistics.
Judge Joyner said that one of the important things about language in the Ann Arbor case is that the children have a barrier to learning caused not by a lack of understandability. The children understand the teachers, and to teachers listen, they understand the children, and he did not find the teachers out of compliance in that at all. But he said there was a barrier which has to do with an attitude toward language. If you assume that the language spoken at home is a bad language, is a deficit, is something that should be wiped out, then you will communicate to the child who speaks it, even if he doesn't speak it in school, the idea that he's not good, or that she is not good. And so one of the things that Judge Joyner said is that we should have a teacher education program that would teach the teachers about the nature of the dialect and how to assess it realistically, to know where the children are in their learning of standard English, so that they can ultimately learn to produce standard English, both spoken and to learn to read it. We're not going to rewrite the Library of Congress in black English. I don't think anybody ever suggested that that would happen. But that one of the important things is that we get at that understanding of the child who speaks a different dialect, namely black English, so that he's not stigmatized, he's not made to feel uncomfortable, he's not misassessed, or that he's not thought to be stupid or unintelligent.
Dr. Hope, what is the basic problem that we're confronting in this debate over black English?
In my view, the basic problem is the failure to learn to read, and that in turn is based on what we call interference between the familiar language that the students know, that is those who speak what we call the black vernacular, and American edited English. That's the textbook variety of American English, which is the written language. All of our knowledge is coded in it, and so the students must acquire mastery of standard English. May I, before we go further, make two positions clear, because I think it's always helpful to do that. First, we are in agreement that the goals of the schools and the goals of the parents are identical. That is, black parents want their students to learn to read, to be able to succeed in this society. There can be no question of that. Therefore, any debate on goals, I think, is counterproductive. So I think we can take that as a given, and that's exactly what these parents in Ann Arbor were saying. And secondly, I think that we can draw from a variety of disciplines to speak to the problems which have to be clearly identified. It's not just a language problem per se, but we also have to draw from the social sciences, what people in research have found out about the social science problem areas for these students. We have to draw from cultural anthropology in terms of cultural identity, cultural needs, group cohesiveness. We have to know that language codifies such things as attitudes, values, beliefs, norms, and so on.
Dr. Grace Holt of the University of Illinois at Chicago Circle, along with two other authors, has taken a meritorious step towards tackling the problems of non-standard speakers through a cross-cultural reading program called Bridge. Bridge is a unique reading program for understanding black students in junior and senior high school. The program is based on the belief that the teacher must start with the child's own vernacular and proceed with a technique called associative bridging to familiarize them with a transition form of English and finally leading them into speaking standard English. The student's dialect becomes a meaningful foundation for learning standard English. This way, black vernacular and standard English are treated equally, and students' linguistic and cultural experience is respected and utilized in the learning process.
A method to bridge the language gap for Afro-Americans. Next on Tony Brown's Journal.
What some call black English was created by people from different cultures, heritages, and languages bound together chiefly by the color of their skin, who sought a method to communicate with one another and their captors. Some linguists theorize that the black dialect stemmed from a common West African pidgin that slaves developed during the times that they were warehoused in African ports and crammed into the holds of ships on their way to the United States. This pidgin form of speech incorporated the vocabulary of one language and the grammar of another.
We are very sensitive about our past. It's very difficult to overcome the stigma of slave antecedents, for example. So we are very self-conscious about a number of things. Class is an inferior group in this socially stratified society. The language that we speak and the language of our forebears was likewise stigmatized as inferior. And that is, in fact, what was promoted in this society. So that we have a legacy and a heritage of being ashamed of those things which can be identified as distinctively black.
Before the interview, Dr. Hope, I promised to ask you about your reaction that you had to a newspaper article that quoted a prominent black who was saying that a case was being made for black English, and it was a corrupted form of English, and that's backwards. What is your reaction to that?
Well, clearly I disagree with the statement because linguistic research has shown that it's not a corrupt form of anything. It's an autonomous system of its own. But then I have two additional ideas on that. One, I think these kinds of comments are made because black people who have made it in this society are very anxious for the rest of the group. And that the level of that anxiety very often prompts a knee-jerk reaction of that kind to a very crucial kind of problem that really doesn't address the issue at all. It doesn't speak to what the system does. It doesn't talk about the potential of the language. What it does is further define it as inferior because of the people who speak it. And that is something that I cannot accept under any circumstances.
Bridge is a reading program. Fundamentally, what is it based on? What is the premise or premises for it? And has it been successful?
We wanted to have accurate representations of language as it is used in the community. So, in other words, to allow the students to be able to use that which was familiar to them, and to see if we could at least speak to the myth that the students lacked certain kinds of concepts. We knew that this was not the case. So we began with certain different assumptions than many people do that are prevalent in the literature. We began with the assumption that they were competent in terms of their ability to communicate. We began with the assumption, based on the evidence, of course, that they had a linguistic system, that their errors, so-called errors, were not idiosyncratic. We also know that these students need positive self-images of self, but most of all, they need realistic situations that have some meaning in their own lives, to which they can relate in terms of getting meaning from the printed page. We wanted all of those things. But more than that, we wanted to have represented in a reading program the idea that is basic to a democratic society, and that is equality and mutually shared respect. We've never had that for our students in terms of any reading program that I'm aware of. We wanted to use what we call the black vernacular, that which the students know, they're familiar with, they're conversant in it, and it gives them a little sense of pride after they get over the shock of being introduced to it in the classroom, in terms of motivating them to know that there's something that they have that's useful and functional, that's not denied. Then we also wanted to represent something that, admittedly, we don't have the basic research, all of it that has been done, but I myself have been doing some research on this for about 10 years, and that is the notion in linguistics of what we call dialect blending.
Scholarly research has illustrated that educators must be sensitive to the language switching that these children must perform. Otherwise, the children would probably not respond to instruction. Historically, this sensitivity has not been present. Without an understanding of dialectical differences, the language barrier can become insurmountable. Dr. Norman Miller, a social psychologist at the University of Southern California, and Dr. Harold Gerard, a social psychologist at UCLA, thought that they would demonstrate the effectiveness of school desegregation through busing in a massive 10-year, $1 million study. The busing experiment took place in Riverside, California, 75 miles east of Los Angeles, with strong community support. The authors wanted to document its success. The theory was that the higher the percentage of whites in a classroom, the better the black children's test scores would be. However, after 1 year, anxiety increased substantially among black children. After 5 years, the minority children had not progressed by being with whites, largely because teachers tended to downgrade a minority student because of his dialect. The minority students did not successfully compete. Just as the black children in the Riverside study did not successfully compete because of the language barrier, they will not be able to successfully compete in the job market unless they have a working knowledge of standard English. In our society, it is generally true that you are as successful as you sound. Many black professionals have found that verbal skills are vital tools and techniques for upward mobility. Although education, experience, talent, and personality are important elements to success, how we communicate verbally can reinforce or diminish these attributes. The dialect of black Americans can be colorful and vividly expressive. However, street slang is unacceptable in the business sector. In the corporate world, success often boils down to the ability to speak intelligently and intelligibly. Education plays a vital part in the development of verbal skills, and it is generally true that highly educated people tend to speak well. Thus, a black child's later ability to enter the economic mainstream is dependent on the verbal skills that he acquires in the classroom.
Research can show us that those who are employed are those who manage to manage to communicate effectively, to read effectively, and to write effectively, and to talk effectively. And effectively is almost always defined as the standard form of the language. We did research on employers in Washington, D.C., played tape recordings to them, asked them which of these adults and which of these teenagers they would hire. And we knew on the tape which ones were standard speakers and which ones were vernacular English speakers. Invariably, the employers in Washington, D.C. picked the standard speakers. By the way, we played the same tape to high school juniors, black high school juniors in Washington, D.C. They picked exactly the same tapes. So their norms of acceptability were the same as the employers, even though they chose not to speak that way. So there's peer group horizontal acceptability. At the same time, there's vertical acceptability. You need to have both. You need to communicate with the folks you're around, the folks you love, the folks you work with and live with. But you also have to communicate to those who have power in a society and become a part of that power system.
What is it that you're trying to do as a professional person, the profession is trying to do, that certain people don't understand?
In simple terms, we are trying to promote the idea of mutuality. By that I mean respect, shared functional usage, shared contributions, because black English has contributed to standard English and vice versa. You know, they are not absolutes, separates and apart. So the whole notion of respect for a group and that group's linguistic history, which is tied up with the whole cultural notion, has to be respected. But more than that, it has to be in some way be functional in the schools. You can't have it both ways. You can't say that we respect it on the one hand and we reject it on the other.
The ghetto child's language is his most precious possession. If teachers could appreciate the child's language, they would be able to more effectively work together with the child, helping him or her to grow and develop. It has been said that a race without knowledge of its history and culture is like a tree without roots. Our language, culture, and identity are intertwined. We have to understand that all languages are linguistically valid. On the other hand, we must remember that in the society in which we must function, standard English is the norm. Today, seekers of their piece of the American middle-class pie of plenty must keep these factors in mind. There is a way to bridge the gap between the standard dialect and other dialects at the expense and integrity of none. If teachers, parents, and students take heed, perhaps many black youngsters can escape the green roads of America and take their rightful place on the yellow brick road of prosperity.